What is up, everybody? Walt Key here. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for jumping online with me today. It is a beautiful Monday here in Central Virginia. And today I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about home inspections when you're making a purchase. So I was actually at a home inspection this morning for one of my buyer clients, and I thought, man, this is a great teachable moment. Let me just hop online and talk about this for a minute. So when does it potentially make sense for you to waive your home inspection contingency? When is it not worth assuming that risk to waive the contingency? And what are some things that you can look at in order to determine what risk you might be assuming in each individual home that you look at before you put an offer in? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So generally speaking, when I consult with a buyer and we're talking about any one particular house, and we start talking about, do we waive a home inspection contingency? Do we want to assume that risk to get this house? What kind of risk might we be taking on if we waived our home inspection contingency? There's about 5 big ticket items that I always try to look for my buyer to see if it makes good sense, risk first reward, to waive a home inspection contingency in hopes to get the house that they want. And those 5 items are roof, foundation, major mechanicals, electrical, and plumbing. Now, if those 5 things need some love, it's probably worth doing a home inspection. And if those 5 things you can determine are in pretty solid shape, then the risk to you to waive a home inspection might be a little less. Now, obviously, I am not a licensed home inspector, nor am I a licensed general contractor, so I can't get into the weeds with you about what every little nuance of a home inspection means as well as a home inspector can. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express a few times, and I've done enough home inspections with a really great home inspector friend of mine that I get a pretty good feeling at this point about the big ticket items that he highlights and the big expenses that you would need to be looking at if you were indeed to buy a home that needed some love. So again, roof, foundation, major mechanicals, electrical, and plumbing. Those are my 5 big ticket items that I always try to look for in a little bit more detail than my buyer might because they just don't know what they're looking at. And so let's talk about those for just a minute. So the roof is something that nobody, not even a licensed home inspector, can give you an exact date for. So if the seller happens to have it replaced recently, then obviously there's a receipt, there's a statement of work, and you can pin that roof age down. But if it's an older house and the sellers that are in it now, maybe they didn't buy it brand new, so they don't quite know how old the roof is, there's no great way to pin it down to the day or even to the year. A good quality home inspector will be able to tell you, hey, this probably has at least 10 to 15 years more life on it, or you should probably start budgeting for a new one because this might only have about 5 or 6 years left. That's about the assessment they can give you. But let's talk about a quick piece of math that you can do to give yourself an idea of what a home roof might be aged at. And here's what I do. We know that the average shingled roof, which is the majority of roofs in America, will last 25 to 30 years. Most shingle manufacturers have a 25 or a 30-year shingle, and maybe you stretch a couple years one way or the other, but in general, a 25 to 30-year lifespan is right for a roof. So let's take, for example, a home that we're looking at, and it's built in 1985. We don't have any other records of when the roof might have been replaced. The current owner doesn't know how old it is. And so we say, well, let's do some basic math. If the home was built in 1985 and the average roof lasts 25 to 30 years, if we were to take 1985 and add 25 to 30 years on it, that's going to put us in the range of 2010 to 2015 when the roof was likely replaced, give or take a year or two. And so from that, we can say, well, if this roof was replaced in 2010 to 2015, here we are 2021, we're somewhere in the realm of 10 years, give or take a few years, on the age of the roof. Now, even if we're off by a few years, that still shows us that we have lots of life left in that roof, as opposed to, let's say, that same roof, a house was built in 1965, 1970, we do that same 25 to 30 year math, and what we determine is, well, shucks, this roof may only be 5, 10 years left. And so you can do a real quick snapshot of math. And then here's the other thing. If you're looking at the math and you say 1985, 25 to 30 years, this roof should only be 10 years old. Otherwise, if it's not 10 years old, it's 40 plus years old on a 25 to 30 year shingle. If you look at a roof and it is beyond its normal service life, you can usually tell. The difference between a 10-year-old roof and a 40-year-old roof is pretty drastic. And so running that quick math and looking at the roof yourself will give you an idea of how much life does this have in it. Do I need to budget right away for a new roof? Do I need to potentially have the seller talk about helping me out with a new roof? Or do I feel like this roof has got at least 5 to 10 more years in it and I can budget little bits at a time and be ready when the time comes to replace it? So that's roof, and that's just a quick down and dirty on how you can assess the roof. Foundation. A lot of homes in Central Virginia specifically are built on a crawl space, and that crawl space can be a rough place if not maintained properly. So the biggest issue that you're looking for in a crawl space is moisture. Yes, you can also assess the foundation around that crawl space. Does it look like there's cracking? Is the wall starting to shift? A little bit of fine cracking on the exterior stucco is not a big concern, but when you get inside the crawl space, if you see drastic shifting in the blocks or big cracks in the concrete, that might be an indication that things have settled a bit more than they should have. But what you're really looking for in a crawl space is moisture related issues. And so is there a good moisture barrier on the ground to keep that moisture from the earth down away from the floor joist, the insulation, etc.? Or is there no moisture barrier at all? And so that moisture from the ground, every time it rains, that moisture just slowly soaks up into the floor joist, the sill plates, the insulation in your floors. Over long periods of time, wood will absorb that moisture, and the more moisture that wood absorbs, the softer your floor joist and your support for your house will become. And so in a really old house with foundation and floor joist issues, it's obvious because you'll see slopes, you'll feel soft spots. You don't want that. That's a bad day. So getting into the crawl space and looking for a moisture barrier. Is it visually wet? Are there signs that the wood has absorbed a lot of moisture? Do I see white powdery substances? Do I see indications that there might be some sort of mildew growing? Is the insulation itself in good shape, or is it starting to sag and fall down out of the floor joist? An indication that it's absorbed enough moisture that it's getting heavy and it's coming down. All of those things is something you want to look at. Now, in the short term, if it is a relatively new house, but the crawl space is rough, you can fix a lot of those basic issues by putting down a good moisture barrier, potentially putting in a small, simple French drain around it to pull the moisture away. And then you won't necessarily have major moisture issues down the road. But if it's an older home, decades old, and those moisture issues have potentially been going on for a long time, you have to start asking yourself, how soft is my floor joist getting? What kind of condition is my sill plate in? Is the insulation under the floor falling apart and I need to go in there and put all new insulation in? And so that's something worth looking at. I know it's a little dirty in there, and I don't necessarily tell my clients to go crawling in the crawl space, but I will absolutely break out my flashlight and go into the crawl space just to get a snapshot on what kind of condition we're dealing with underneath the house, because that underneath the house condition can absolutely affect the rest of the house condition. So that's roof and foundation. Let's talk a bit about major mechanicals. And when I say major mechanicals, I primarily mean things like the appliances, the HVAC system, the hot water heater. How old are those things? What kind of condition are they in? Now, you can find these things out very easily when you're actually walking through the home to do a tour. The appliances, probably the easiest. Two things to look for: microwave and dishwasher, right? Sometimes the refrigerator, finding the manufacturer label and the date of manufacturer, because they put them in different places on different refrigerator models, that's a little more tedious. But a little pro tip here: almost always the microwave's manufacturer label is in between the seam of where the door hinges open and the actual face of the microwave, it's almost always in that same spot. And there's always a manufacturer date on that label. So if you just open the microwave and look between the hinge of the door and the microwave, you'll see the label. Check the manufacturer date. Now, if all the appliances are matching, let's say you go into a kitchen and they're all GE profile stainless steel appliances, everything matches. It's a pretty fair bet that whatever the microwave manufacturer date is, the rest of the appliances are similar time frame. You can double check that by looking in the dishwasher. Almost every dishwasher, when you first open the door to the dishwasher, the tag is going to be right across the top of the door. And again, usually manufacturer date will be right there, very easy. Stoves are a little more tedious. Fridges, they find it in different spots, but the microwave and the dishwasher will be a great indication as to the age of the appliances. Hot water heater, very similar. Almost every hot water heater will have an actual date of manufacturer on it. If you don't see it, you can grab the serial number, and I'll talk about that in a second with HVAC. You can actually determine the year of production based on the serial number. And then let's talk about the HVAC, because that's a big expense. Not every HVAC system is going to actually have the day that it was manufactured on the tag. Some will have a month and year of date of manufacturer. Some newer ones, they're not putting the date on it, but the date is actually coded into the serial number. And while at first you may think, I don't know how to look for the date on this, it's actually very easy to take the brand and the serial number, go online, a quick Google search will show you how that manufacturer codes the date. They're almost all the same, and they all use an alphanumeric sequence in the serial number, and usually the first 4 to 6 numbers will tell you when the month and the year that it was manufactured. So let's say you're looking outside at an outdoor unit and you just see a serial number, but you obviously have the brand and you have the serial number. In about 15 seconds, you can determine what month and what year was this HVAC manufacturer based on that serial number. And then what you're looking at from there is how old is it and what brand is it? And the reason I say what brand is it is because generally speaking, an HVAC is going to have 12 to 15 years service life. Now that seems like a short period of time for some HVACs, and it is, because a really high quality HVAC system, I've seen them last decades. A really low budget, cheap HVAC system, 15 years might be a real stretch to keep it running. So you can look at the HVAC, determine the rough age, and then some basic math again in your head will say, this is a great brand of HVAC and it's only 7 years old. I've probably got many years of good life in this, especially if I put it on a yearly or semi-annually service plan like Michael & Sons or some of our local folks do. Have the service done once or twice a year to clean it out, maintain it, keep it in tip-top shape. It'll last even longer for you. But if it's really old and the grill looks to be rusting away and you read the manufacturer label and it's 19 years old, you should probably start thinking in your head, this is something I need to budget for. Even if it's working well now, at any minute it could not be working well. And so similar with the hot water heater, look at the manufacturer date, get a feel for the age. So that's major mechanicals. That's the appliances themselves, the hot water heater, and the HVAC. All of those things can be big expenses when they start going out. And so you want to get a good feel for those. So that's roof, foundation, major mechanicals. Now let's talk a minute about electrical and plumbing, because this is a little bit more tedious. Generally speaking, a newer home, and by newer I mean 1975-ish, 1980-ish and on, almost all of your homes are going to be up to date in terms of the current electrical code and current plumbing code. If you shop around for older homes, maybe you really like the feel of a 1950s bungalow or something to that effect, and a 1920s colonial, then you really got to start looking closer at the electrical and the plumbing. So here's a couple tidbits of information. And again, I'm not a licensed plumber, I'm not a licensed electrician, but I do know how to Google the history of electrical and plumbing, and you can find this data for yourself. So in the 1950s is when they first started saying, hey, we need to have 3-prong grounded electrical outlets. And so any house prior to about mid-1950 might not have grounded electrical outlets. And just because it's a 1950s home and it's been remodeled does not mean that the electrical has actually been upgraded. So for example, I can go to Lowe's right now and for 15 bucks buy a 3-prong electrical outlet, take it to any house I want, unwire the 2-prong outlet, wire a 3-prong outlet, and visually it looks to be updated. But that doesn't mean that the outlet is grounded, and it doesn't mean that I went into the actual electrical panel, rewired electric, and grounded the electrical lines properly. So in a pre-1950s, 1960s home, you really want to pay attention to that. The GFCI outlets in the kitchen and the bathrooms outside the wet spaces is a little bit less of a concern, in my opinion, just my opinion, because they're easy to replace. So let's say, for example, it's a 1950 house and they did remodel everything properly. They rewired it in 1975, but there's no GFCI outlets in the bathrooms. I can, again, go to Lowe's, buy a GFCI outlet, and rewire that in about 15 minutes for proper safety of the GFCI tripping and water gets in. So that's an easy piece, but you really got to look at the wiring in those pre-1950, 1960 homes to make sure they've been updated properly and they're grounded according to current code. Now, a little fun fact, since we're in the state of Virginia, I think it was early to mid 1970s before Virginia actually had a uniform building code, which means even though in the 1950s and the early 1960s is when all of the electrical codes were getting implemented and we had to have 3-prong, et cetera, it wasn't actually until the 1970s that it became uniform standard in Virginia. So you could still potentially find a 1970s house that was done using 1950s electrical. So just that's very rare, but just be mindful of that. Really what you're talking about is a pre-1960 or so house. Look into the electrical a little deeper. Now with plumbing, same thing. The lead and galvanized steel piping, which are essentially the same, galvanized as dipped, but whatever. Old metal plumbing was used very regularly all the way up through the mid 50s into the early 60s in some places. And what they determined was even though galvanized steel it's dipped on the outside to prevent corrosion, that doesn't do anything for the inside where the water is actually making contact with the pipes. And so galvanized steel and lead plumbing pipes tend to rust away from the inside out. And it's very hard for you to see when that is going to start leaking until it starts leaking because it eats away from the inside out. So again, pre-1955, 1965 homes, just be mindful, pay attention to the plumbing, look in the crawl space, look in the basement, see the exposed plumbing and see if it's newer PVC plumbing or if it's still old lead or galvanized steel plumbing, because that stuff can give you some real headache down the road when it starts failing. And on average, the industry standards say that stuff will last about 50 years. So if you think about a home built in 1959 and it's got galvanized steel plumbing, well, fast forward 50 years, that's 2019, you're already a couple years past the maximum service life that it should last. So that's what you want to look for electrical and plumbing. So let's put that all together. If the roof looks to be good and I can date it to probably within a given time frame to say it's not at the end of its service life. If I get in the crawl space and I don't see major moisture issues, I don't see mold concerns, I don't see the floor joist starting to seem like it's getting soft from absorbing moisture, if the mechanicals, the HVAC, the appliances, the hot water heater appear to be in pretty solid shape and they're not super old, and if the electrical and plumbing appear to be updated and in good working order, those are my big ticket items that are going to cause me the most money and the most headache when it's time to fix. If those 5 things are in pretty solid shape, the risk to you as a buyer to waive your home inspection contingency in this hot market is a little less, right? We still don't know what we don't know, and a home inspector is a wonderful partner for you to have to really dig through that house with a fine-tooth comb. But in a very competitive market where you might be bidding against multiple other buyers that are willing to waive their contingency, you being comfortable waiving your home inspection contingency is important. And so knowing what you're getting as best you can by looking at those 5 things will give you a pretty good indication of the risk that you would be assuming if you were to waive your home inspection contingency. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Just wanted to throw that out there because, like I said, I was at a home inspection today and I just thought I should share that data with everyone, and I hope it's value added to you. Leave me questions or comments and I'm happy to answer them as we go. If you have any other tips, tricks, questions, comments, concerns about home inspections, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, it's a beautiful Monday. Go out there, have a wonderful day. See you later.